So, yesterday I reviewed the brand new iPad Air 4th generation of 2020 to my iPad Pro, and I think that was pretty easy to recommend the iPad Air as the best bang for the buck. But now I want to compare the Air to the 8th generation iPad, the one that just came out this year, because I think a lot of people are trying to decide, will the iPad be good enough, fast enough for what I want to use it for, or do I need to bump up to the Air? And I think it comes down to, is the juice worth the squeeze for a lot of people? Basically, what I'm saying is the iPad goes for $329 at the base model. The iPad Air starts at $599. That's $270 that you're going to want to get a lot better iPad for that amount of money. And better is kind of a relative term, but I think we can all agree that it comes down to a couple main things. And one would be physical appearance and build, and the second would be the internals, or how well the iPad performs the task that you want it to perform. And all this is subjective, so what I like in terms of build and what I use my iPad for might be completely different from what you like or what you use your iPad for. So as I go through this recommendation, keep that in mind because what I recommend might not be the best for you. So starting off, let's talk about that build quality, and this is where these two iPads are extremely different. Starting off with the iPad, this just feels familiar, meaning that everything feels almost the exact same as last year and the year before that. It has the same sort of layout where it has the top and bottom bezels, has Touch ID on the front of it, has the rounded off corners. Everything just feels very familiar with the iPad. Meanwhile, this year, the iPad Air went away from that kind of familiar feel of the iPad and kind of adapted the iPad Pro look to it and design, where it has the front of it is all screen, just slim bezels around the whole thing. They moved Touch ID from the front to the power button. They squared off the sides just like the iPad Pro does. So everything kind of changed for the iPad Air. And while getting used to Touch ID and the power button is a little bit of a learning curve, it's tough not to say that this is a huge win for the iPad Air. The whole thing being a screen, no button, I think is a very good modern look to it. It feels new even though it has basically the same design as the iPad Pro does now. It has a new design, quote unquote, which sleek, modern, and I think it just looks great. And even though the iPad Air is bigger, it is actually just a hair lighter. Comes in at just 1 pound, whereas the iPad comes in at 1.08 pounds. For screens, you have a 10.2-inch Retina LCD display on the iPad. Has a resolution of 2160 by 1620, or 264 pixels per inch. On the iPad Air, you have a 10.9-inch liquid Retina LCD, and that has a resolution of 2360 by 1640 with the same 264 pixels per inch. They're both rated at 500 nits of brightness, so they do get nice and bright and can be used outside. However, the iPad Air is a fully laminated display, meaning the screen is right up against the glass, whereas the iPad has an air gap, which gives it kind of a hollow feeling when you tap on it or use a pencil on it. A lot of people don't like that sound or that feel of the air gap being there. Also, the iPad Air has a much more color accurate display than the iPad. So again, it's tough not to give the win to the iPad Air here. But really, when you're talking about two really great displays, one just being a tad better than the other. But that's not to say that the iPad is a bad display at all. It's actually a very, very nice display. And actually, if you're not a person that's going to be writing on this a lot, I actually don't mind the air gap all that much. I think you get used to it after a little bit. A lot of people don't like it, don't like the feel of it, and I totally understand that. It does have a little bit different feel to it, a little bit more hollow, but for me, it's something that I got used to pretty quick. For cameras, you're looking at an 8 megapixel camera on the back of the iPad and a 12 megapixel camera on the back of the iPad Air. Obviously, a little bit better camera on the iPad Air. However, how many people go around and take pictures with their iPad? I personally don't see a lot of them, and I don't do it myself, but if you're one of those people, that's great, and maybe the iPad Air is better for you then. I think what most people are concerned about is the front-facing camera, because most people use their iPads for FaceTime or conference calls and that sort of thing. So on the iPad, you get a 1.2 megapixel front camera, and on the iPad Air, it's a 7 megapixel camera. So definitely a better front-facing camera on the iPad Air. Another big design difference is the ports that they use. the iPad Air switched over to the USB-C port this year, while the iPad is still on the Lightning port. USB-C is just much more universal and opens up the iPad Air to a lot more capabilities. The iPad is still kind of, that Lightning port is just mainly charging and not much else. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at these things. And with the new design, the iPad Air is now capable of much more integrations with the different accessories that Apple comes out with. For instance, the second generation iPad Pencil can now be used on the iPad Air. You can now use the Magic Keyboard with the iPad Air, which you can't do with the iPad. The iPad, you can still use the first generation iPad Pencil, but again, you have to kind of figure out a way to store that or keep it with you because it doesn't attach like it will on the iPad Air. And then you can use a Smart Folio keyboard, which I personally have reviewed, and it's okay. I mean, it's definitely not the Magic Keyboard, but it's serviceable. And when it comes to processors, you're looking at the A12 Bionic processor for the iPad, and then the latest and greatest A14 Bionic for the iPad Air. Again, you're going to see a speed bump with the iPad Air here. I mean, that's just when you have a better processor like that. The A12 is a couple years old now. So when you have the newest processor, you're going to see a little bit of a speed increase. Now, in my tests, I see a little bit of a speed increase in the A14 right now, but not so much where I'm astounded of the difference or I'm shocked or that I wouldn't use the iPad because it's so much slower. And a lot of people make a big deal about the performance increase, the GPU, the CPU increase of the A14, all the transistors that are in there. In layman's terms, the A12 is still a great chip. It's not as great as the A14, but for most tasks, almost all tasks that you're going to put an iPad through, it performs flawlessly. I mean, this thing is really fast, and I'm actually really surprised of how quick and how much it's able to keep up with the Air. Battery life is rated the same for both of these. It's rated at 10 hours. Now, that's going to drastically change depending upon how much you use it and what you use it for. However, iPads, I mean, when it comes to battery life, there's really nothing to worry about when it comes to either of these two. You're going to get a lot of battery life no matter what you're going to be doing. So that kind of covers the comparison between the external and internal of both these devices. Now it's kind of determining what is best for you. If someone came up and asked me if it was worth spending an extra $270 to upgrade from the iPad to the iPad Air, I would say yes. And I say that because I think you get an upgrade across the board rather than just a couple categories like the old iPad Air did. I mean, you get a better design, in my opinion. You get the all-screen design of the iPad Pro. You get a bigger, better screen than the iPad. You get access to all the newer accessories like the iPad Pro does. You get better cameras. You get USB-C. You get a better processor. I mean, across the board, you just get everything that's a little bit better. However, I would also tell that person that just because it is worth the extra money, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should spend it. Because if you're like a lot of people buy tablets for emailing, for web browsing, for social media, for streaming content and that sort of thing. If that's what you're buying a tablet for, buy the iPad. In all honesty, the iPad probably is a better buy. Then you can save yourself $270 because the iPad does those things perfectly. In fact, it does it very, very fast. I'm very impressed with it. Whereas I see the iPad Air geared more towards kind of the professionals, where it kind of takes over that iPad Air 11-inch a little bit, where people still want to do all those tasks. They want to email, they want to stream content, they want to go on social media and that sort of thing. But they also want to do professional type of tasks on it. They want to do, whether it's video editing or photo editing or something like that, they just want to do more work type of things on their iPad. But like I said, if you're not one of those people that it's going to be using this to photo edit or video edit or do a lot of drawing on, I think the iPad is probably the better buy for you, to be completely honest. I don't think you need to spend the extra $270 on the iPad Air because the iPad Pro does everything else very, very well. So I hope this video helps you make a buying decision. Trust me, I know that it's tough to pick between these two. At the end of the day, they're both great tablets. So, I mean, can you go wrong? I don't think so. But, I hope that this helps you find the one that's a little bit more geared towards how you're going to use it. And maybe it helps you save a little money. So thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate you watching. And make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. We will catch you on the next video.